the day the creek fought back. The moment I stepped out onto the porch and saw my cows swimming, not walking, in the middle of the pasture, I knew Dana had done something unforgivable. Their hooves flailed like awkward toddlers learning to dance, splashing through waist-deep water where dry grass should have been. Jolene, my oldest and sassiest cow, shot me a look like I was the one who flooded the place. For a split second, I thought maybe I was dreaming, but the cold sting of the early spring air on my face confirmed this was all too real. Then my eyes followed the chaos upstream to where my cattle bridge used to be, a sturdy wooden crossing built by generations before me, now nothing more than a muddy scar along the creek bank. It was gone. Gone, like someone had yanked it out of existence overnight. And there, standing on the far side of the creek in a pastel sweater and oversized sunglasses, was Dana from the HOA, holding a steaming cup of coffee like she hadn't just declared war. I gripped the porch railing so hard I thought it might snap. That bridge wasn't some garden decoration. It was the lifeblood of this ranch. Without it, the cows couldn't cross to graze. They couldn't reach fresh water. They'd wander into town or, worse, out onto the highway. My great-granddad, my granddad, and my father had all kept that bridge alive with sweat, blood, and more than a few cuss words. Now, in the span of one night, it was reduced to a stack of broken timbers piled like firewood on Dana's side of the fence. She caught me looking, raised her cup like she was toasting my misery, and sauntered back toward her vinyl-sided palace as if she'd just clipped a stray branch instead of dismantling the very foundation of my ranch. I jumped into my boots and made it down to the creek in minutes, splashing through the frigid water to inspect the mess. It was worse than I thought. She hadn't just removed the bridge, she dug up the anchors, tore out the footings, left nothing but churned up mud and broken dreams. A few cows stood on the opposite bank, mooing helplessly, looking as confused as I felt. Others milled around in the flooded pasture, bumping into each other like tourists lost in a corn maze. Then Dana reappeared, this time with a clipboard in hand. She waved it in the air like it made her actions legal. According to her, the bridge was an unapproved structure encroaching on HOA green space. Green space. My granddad's ashes were scattered on that so-called green space long before Dana and her perfume-drenched HOA cronies slapped together their gated community. I reminded her of that fact, but she just shrugged and said, rules are rules. Worse yet, she wasn't bluffing. She had somehow roped Sheriff Delaney into this mess. He showed up later that afternoon, hat in hand, apologizing as he confirmed Dana had gotten survey documents showing the bridge crossed into HOA territory. Except I knew those documents were off. The creek hadn't changed. I'd bet a month's feed Dana had quietly moved the boundary markers while no one was watching. That evening, I paced the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills as the cows huddled on the far bank, stranded. My stomach churned. Dana had me over a barrel. Without that bridge, the cows couldn't graze properly. That meant they'd either starve or escape. Either way, the ranch would crumble. The feed store wouldn't sell on credit. The bank had already warned me about the mortgage. And I wasn't about to beg Dana for permission to rebuild. The town wasn't much help either. Some folks laughed it off, typical HOA nonsense. Others worried Dana's antics would spill into their lives. Even Mayor Ellis told me I should play nice and work within the system. Work within the system? I was dealing with someone who didn't just bend rules. She rewrote them, laminated them, and forced the town to pretend it made sense. That night, I sat on the tailgate of my pickup, sipping lukewarm coffee and staring at the empty creek where the bridge used to be. The cows mooed softly in the distance. For the first time in a long while, I felt small. This land was my legacy. My family sweat soaked into every fence post and pasture. Dana hadn't just taken down a bridge. She cut through the heart of this place. Then, I noticed something, a faint trickle of water curving away from the creek, disappearing into the brush. I followed it, flashlight trembling in my hand, until I found an old, half-buried stone channel. My grandfather had shown me this once when I was a kid. Back then, he called it the original creek path, abandoned when the flow was redirected to make way for the cattle bridge. As I stood there, Dana's betrayal weighing heavy on me, an idea flickered to life. If she wanted to play dirty, she'd better be ready to get her pastel sneakers muddy. The creek didn't have to stay where it was. And if it flowed just a little differently, it might find itself meandering right through Dana's manicured backyard. The next morning, before the dew had even melted off the pasture grass, I was elbow-deep in the back corner of the barn, digging through Grandpa's old trunk. Dust billowed up with every toss of a rusted horseshoe or coiled rope. Beneath a pile of faded receipts and brittle yellowed maps, I found it, Grandpa's creek journals. Thick, leather-bound, full of scribbly handwriting, but clear enough for what I needed. He'd mapped every curve, every bend, every secret of this land, including the very channel I stumbled upon. If I could clear the old path, nudge the water just enough during the upcoming spring rains, the creek would do the rest of the work for me. And it would pour right through Dana's backyard, right through the HOA's fancy new amphitheater project. I could already see the look on her face when her artificial turf floated away like a cheap pool toy. Still, I knew better than to go it alone. By sundown, I had rounded up the only crew I trusted, Will, a retired demolition expert with half his hearing but all his sense of humor, Cora, the best mechanic in 3 counties who could weld anything short of a broken heart, and Jace, my conspiracy-loving neighbor who was convinced Dana worked for some shadow government agency. And after the bridge stunt, I wasn't so sure he was wrong. We met in the feed store parking lot under cover of night. I laid out the plan over shared coffee and Cora's homemade cinnamon rolls. Not one of them blinked. Will was practically giddy at the idea of moving Earth again. Jace insisted we install cameras to catch Dana's reaction. I didn't have the heart to tell him nobody outside this town would care. But I let him dream. By the next evening, we were out under the stars, digging like our lives depended on it. The old creek was overgrown but intact beneath the roots and silt. No dynamite needed, despite Will's obvious disappointment. Just shovels, a few trenches, and a whole lot of sweat. We timed our breaks to avoid Dana's patrols. She had a habit of walking the edge of her property with binoculars, like some suburban general. Word spread through town like smoke on a dry wind. Mr. Avery from the hardware store accidentally overordered piping. The bakery dropped off late-night pies. Even Sheriff Delaney gave me a wink and said he hoped the rains didn't cause too much trouble over by the HOA. Small towns have their own justice system. Dana, of course, got suspicious. She started driving by more often, squinting through her SUV window. But all she saw was fence repair and brush clearing. I waved every time. Even offered her some fresh eggs. She refused with a look like I'd offered her poison. As we neared the finish line, Will hammered a wooden sign into the dirt that read, "Future site of Dana's Aquatic Center." He even drew a stick figure cow doing a cannonball. We laughed so hard we nearly gave ourselves away. Then the spring rains came. Dark clouds rolled over the hills, and by noon, the sky opened up like a busted water tank. The cows huddled under the oak grove. I stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the creek swell and stretch, searching like it remembered where it used to run. It found the new channel quickly. Within hours, the water flowed with purpose, sliding into the trench we'd cut with our bare hands. Downstream, Dana's amphitheater was prepped for the HOA's grand gala, complete with rented chairs, catering, and a band. Dana was in her pastel raincoat, barking orders, not a clue in the world. Until the water arrived. It started as a trickle. Guests laughed, thinking it was a harmless puddle. Dana told someone to mop it up. But creeks don't mop. They rise. In minutes, it was a stream, then a flood. Folding chairs tumbled. The stage wobbled. The band tried to play until the drummer slipped and took off running. And then, in the most poetic twist, Jolene, my sassiest cow, led the herd straight into the backyard, wading through the new waterway like they'd RSVP'd. Guests shrieked. Dana screamed. The amphitheater collapsed. And the news crew, there to film the gala, caught every second of it. The headlines the next day were a dream. Dana tried to pin it on me, but Sheriff Delaney pulled out Grandpa's maps. Turns out, the original creek and the bridge were fully on my land. Worse for Dana, the amphitheater sat squarely in a documented floodplain she had ignored. The HOA imploded. Lawsuits flew. The developer pulled out. Dana's reign was over. And my ranch? It thrived. The cows grazed in peace. The creek sang its old song. We rebuilt the bridge, stronger, wider. The town helped. No one asked. They just showed up. We even held a party. Martha strung up a banner that read, Dana Creek Crossing. Sheriff Delaney chuckled, but didn't make us take it down. As the sun set, I leaned on the new bridge and smiled. This land, this town, my legacy, it stood strong. And tucked under my arm was Grandpa's journal. On the last page, a second channel, marked in shaky handwriting. Emergency option, if needed. I hoped I'd never use it, but it sure was nice to know I could.